Alright guys, it's time for us to move forward with our Zentangle watercolor, and now we're going to start doing the watercolor portion of it. Now I ran out to Walmart and looked at a couple different sets. They're not too pricey, but a lot of people have these kinds of things lying at home. Any type of watercolor you have at home will work just fine. If you want to, you can go out and get some, but you don't have to. If you don't have any at home and you don't want to go buy some, the final option, which I hope you all have in your house, is to do what I did here. I brewed up some very dark, very strong coffee. Now, I don't drink coffee, so I actually had to go out and buy some to test this out, but this actually works really great. You don't have a lot of colors with it, but it does make a very nice brown color that you're able to do watercolor painting with pretty successfully. All right. Now for our 3 or more sections on our final paper here, there's 2 techniques that I want to see you use. All right. Technique number 1 is wet on dry, and technique number 2 is wet on wet. Now let me show you what I'm talking about here. Each of you should have one of these smaller sheets of watercolor paper in your packet, and we are going to use that to practice a little bit. All right, I'm gonna get my set out. All right, I've got some water here. I've got a paper towel too to dry my brush off, and I'm just going to grab some paint. Now, right now, our paper is completely dry. Okay, if we are wetting our paint, choosing a color, and painting on top of our paper here, we are effectively doing wet on dry. Okay, dry paper, wet paint. Now, if we were to paint in an area like I'm doing here, let that dry completely, and then come in with another color on top of it, we are still doing wet on dry, because this paint would be completely dry, and we'd come in with a purple and maybe add some designs on top of that. That's still wet on dry. Now, wet on wet can be a little bit more exciting. I'm going to clean my brush off, and with clean water, I'm just going to drop some on here, paint it on, and I'm going to get this part of my paper nice and wet. Okay, it's hard for you to see, I'm sure, because it's clear, but maybe you can see the shine of the wet paper on there. And if you've got a bigger brush at your disposal, this is a good time to use it for this clear water on there. All right, now my paper's wet. Now if I come in with a color, let's get some of this one here, and paint in there, all I have to do is touch the brush to the paper, and you can see it starts to spread out and expand. I can do polka dots, and those will all kind of move outward and blossom almost like a flower. All right, you can also do this and mix colors together. Let's grab this lighter blue here and see how that works. Well, we've got wet paint that we're putting down on wet paper, and that's the wet on wet technique. Okay, you can get some very nice gradients with this too. I've got some purple next to this blue here. I can clean my brush off, even dry it a little bit because my paper is really wet, and I can blend these 2 colors together right on my paper and get a nice gradient from this fuchsia pinky purple color right to this blue. All right, and when you're painting, make sure you're on a nice flat surface, or all this is going to drip right off. All right, so these are the 2 techniques I want to see. At least one usage of wet on wet, where you paint the paper with clear water first and then paint on top, and at least one example of wet on dry, where either you are painting just on the dry blank paper and then painting on top of it, or you're painting an area with one color, or even doing a wet on wet to make a gradient, letting that dry completely, and then painting on top of that. All right, when you are working on your final paper, a couple things to keep in mind when it comes to craftsmanship. All right, number 1 is we do not want paint in the Zentangle areas. All right, so you need to be very careful. I want you to come right up to the edges of those Zentangle areas, but I don't want any paint to go in there. If you have some masking tape at home, which I have somewhere here, you can try using that, all right, but don't leave it on there for very long, and make sure you lint that tape. What do I mean by lint that tape? Well, we've all had a time when we pull tape off of a piece of paper and it tears the paper, and we don't want that to happen. But if you lint it first, you can prevent that from happening at least a little bit. All right, and the way that you do that is you take your strip of masking tape and you stick it to your clothes. Peel it off, stick it again, peel it off, stick it again, peel it off, stick it again, and you'll get little bits of fuzz from your clothes onto the tape, and that will keep it from sticking as much to the paper. All right. I recommend you, though, don't worry about the tape. Just be nice and careful when you're up against the edges of your Zentangles. Okay, and on this final paper, again, one example of wet on wet, one example of wet on dry. All right, do your best, and if you're having trouble with materials, please let me know. Come talk to me, and we'll figure something out. All right, good luck, guys.